Hey guys, I've been thinking a lot about factions lately. It all started when I expanded the map of the local area in my Shadowdark game. I added some details like Fish Tree, which is this small fishing village that we created live at the table during our last session, and the town of CRESTMOOR, the site of my introductory Shadowdark adventure. You can download the Cursed Knights of CRESTMOOR on itch.io for free, and I printed out my own copy here as a zine, and you could too. I also made a video which provides a complete explanation of that adventure, the dungeon, and offers a bunch of advice for game masters on how you might choose to run it. I'll put links to the itch page and the video in this video's description. My players are working their way through The Waking of Willoughby Hall. It's an incredible adventure by Ben Milton set in a creepy old house with delightful illustrations by Sam Mamelli. But when we're done with that, who knows what's next? I've seeded my game world with a number of well-regarded adventures that I'm personally interested in running. But my players have no idea what really awaits them in each of these places. As far as they're concerned, they're just dots on a map. So it's up to me to entice them to explore. I could just tell my players what adventure or location we're exploring next, but I really don't want to. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've done that before, and I'm not too proud to say that I'll probably do it again at some point. In general, my players are willing to go wherever I tell them that adventure awaits, until they're not. As far as I can work out, this behavior is entirely unpredictable. I mean, we could go months with me leading them around as if on a leash. And sure, they may ignore an obvious plot hook here or maim an innocent NPC there, but they'd pretty much go on any adventure that I asked them to. Now, historically, that was fine. Back when the adventures that I ran were big fantasy epics, saving the world type stuff, with a beginning, a middle, and a logically anticipated and satisfying ending. But these days, I'm trying to be a bit more old school with my game mastering. I'm prepping a lot less, I'm running shorter modules. I explain the whole thing in this video. But at this point, you're probably wondering, what does any of this have to do with factions? How am I going to lure my characters to different adventure locations that I've placed on the map? That is, unless you've already clicked away to watch a video about a cat making friends with a cow or something.
I was sitting with Brian in the barn and...
Hey, eyes up here, Buster. We're gonna use factions, okay? We're using factions.
By the way, if you want to keep the conversation going between videos, you can join the LowKeyTTRPG Discord, link in the description.
Factions are what I'm going to use to entice my players to travel and explore and discover all of the cool little adventures that I've hidden in and amongst the hexes. Now, it's not the only tool that I'm probably going to use for this, but it's the one that I'm thinking of employing next. But before we talk too much more about factions, I want to talk about Dungeon World. I bet you didn't see this coming. Now, Dungeon World is a story game RPG based on the Powered by the Apocalypse system. Back in late 2017, I ordered the book, and during some time off over the holidays, I gave it a read. Now, at the time, I didn't really think this game was a good match for my group, so I never actually ran or played Dungeon World. I've never actually run or played Dungeon World. Pick whichever sentence you liked better. But there was one chapter in the book that's really stuck with me over the years. A chapter written with unnecessarily dramatic language, a chapter about dangers, grim portents, and impending dooms. It's chapter 15. Now, Dungeon World has this neat system for managing what it calls fronts. And there's a lot of specialized vocabulary with this, like there is with a lot of these story-based RPGs. And that can make talking about their mechanics somewhat complex. So I'll try to cover this concept quickly without going into too much detail. In the book, it says, fronts are designed to help you organize your thoughts on what opposes the players. They're here to contain your notes, ideas, and plans for these opposing forces. Consider them an organizational tool. Now, I know what you're thinking. In an old school game, there may or may not even be anything that's directly opposing the PCs. And you know what? You're right. But there are organizations, factions, if you will, that are trying to accomplish their own goals. You see, the world is a complex place, and your PCs are in the thick of it. Fronts are a tool to help you organize the factions, NPCs, and other forces that are operating in your game world. A front contains one or more dangers. A danger might be a cult, hell-bent on summoning an evil demigod. banished to an alien realm, or a cursed artifact safely under the guard of a holy order of paladins in the citadel of the White Eagle. A front also has a few grim portents. Grim portents, I told you they used overly dramatic language, are used to communicate to the players that a front is making progress. What if the cult manages to defeat the White Eagles and reclaim the cursed item for their depraved half-god master? Grim portents portend or foreshadow an impending doom, a bad thing that is all but inevitable unless the players act before it grows too late. To make all of this work, your grim portents should affect the game world in some way that the characters notice. This change serves as a call to action for the PCs. I told you there was a lot of vocabulary in this, but it's not critical that you have a perfect understanding of these dungeon world mechanics. Heck, I don't even think I have that. Everything I just told you is the way that I think it should work, not necessarily the rules as explicitly written in chapter 15 of that book. The reason I say it's not important is because it's not very old school, but there's still a kernel of a good idea there. Put simply, our game worlds have factions. Our factions should have goals, and as they make progress on those goals, we as game masters need to communicate this to our players. And ideally, they'll respond. But what happens if they don't respond to the foreshadowing of doom? It's okay. If they fail to act, or if they act and fail, the world doesn't end. It just changes. Because I'm running smaller adventures now with smaller stakes. And no matter what the characters do or don't do, the game progresses and new challenges emerge. After reading about fronts, I took a lightweight version of that concept and I employed it in my next 2 campaigns. So it's story time, and if you don't care about stories, then you can skip to this point in the video, and we'll see you on the other side. As always, my videos are fully bookmarked, so you can skip around to the parts that are the most useful to you. Now, at the same time as I was reading about fronts, I was hatching a scheme to run a new Savage Worlds campaign based on Cullen Bunn's incredible graphic novel, The Sixth Gun. The story takes place in an alternate history in the American West, with demons and wendigos and gunslingers, both living and undead. In the comic, the protagonists must locate and destroy 6 magical revolvers imbued with dark magic. Each gun is bound to its wielder and grants them a unique and unholy power. The 6 can only transfer from one owner to another when the current owner is slain. And if someone gains control of all 6 revolvers, they have the ability to remake the world as they see fit. Some may try to gather the 6 to correct injustices. Some may commit new ones, and others, members of an evil cult, hope to restore the power of a pair of ancient primordial gods. It's an incredible setup for an RPG, with baked-in legendary magic items and some beautiful, well-crafted lore that leaves plenty of room for your table to enjoy a unique path to resolution. Now, in most of my campaigns before this one, the central tension was based on an individual or group trying to do something evil and bad, and the player characters would work to prevent them from doing this evil and bad thing. But in this campaign, things were going to be a bit different. With 6 magical guns that needed collecting, there was a fantastic opportunity to have multiple individuals or factions working towards different, specific, and conflicting goals. Instead of a single unifying adventure with an obvious default solution, the players were going to have to make some decisions. Difficult decisions. Decisions that would cost the lives of characters that they had come to know, maybe even care about. And in the end, the players, not I, would choose how the story ended. Would they attempt to assist one of the factions seeking control of the 6? Or would they try to collect them all for themselves? Would they use the guns to remake the world, or would they save us all from their evil by destroying them one by one? To help me manage these big ideas, I created this chart, which identified these resolution options and placed them on 2 axes. Later, I assigned specific NPCs and factions to each of these goals with backstories to match. Now, this chart isn't really a set of fronts from Dungeon World, but the ideas in that game inspired me to come up with this. And maybe some of the ideas in this video will inspire you to think about your own campaign in new ways. Now, I didn't share this chart with my players, but when they interacted with these NPCs, I used it to help me quickly recall the motivations for each character or faction and have them respond accordingly. I liked this solution, but it was somewhat bespoke for games like this one, games that had a small number of clear goals that the characters could align themselves with. I made a similar chart for a Dungeons & Dragons game that I ran a couple of years later. In this game, Aaron, the youngest full-blooded son of the Emperor of Khett, had traveled to the far-off island of Westvale to campaign with his half-siblings and seek his fortune. Shortly after departing for his grand tour, the royal family back home was murdered, suddenly making him the very unexpected heir to the imperial throne. The party, all members of an imperial guard, were sent to Westvale to find the prince and bring him safely home before the news of the murders spread throughout the land. The dangers of the frontier were real, and not least among them were Aaron's half-siblings. If they were to find out their stepfather was dead, it would be easy to stage an accident, and with Aaron out of the way, they could make a play for the throne themselves. This mission was literally the most important thing happening anywhere in the Empire, and no one in Westvale knew what had happened back home. The party traveled around the island, meeting not only Aaron's half-siblings, but other NPCs and factions that had interest in the Empire. The party traveled with them, fought with them or against them. They ate meals with them, and they learned what kind of people they were. Among these factions were trusted loyalists and free-thinking revolutionaries, dwarven separatists, foreign spies, an orc warlord, and power-hungry opportunists. I told the players from the very beginning they could choose any path, support any group, and if they wanted to, they had the opportunity to reshape the Khett Empire as they saw fit. Eventually, they found young Aaron deep in the wilderness. They kept him safe from foreign assassins, his half-siblings, and a brewing civil war. And in the end, they escorted him home and saw him crowned emperor. But they didn't have to. They could have supported the Dwarven uprising or helped Aaron's half-brother found a democracy in Westvale. They could have betrayed Aaron, turning him over to spies from a distant land, weakening the Empire's dominance in the region. The point of these stories isn't to just tell you about my campaigns. I wanted to lay the groundwork for how I've thought about and utilized factions in campaigns past to contrast against how I want to use them in the future. Overall, I think these efforts in these older campaigns were fairly successful, all things considered, because they took place in game worlds where a specific set of world-shaping events were already underway, and the players were thrust into participating in them. But in my Shadowdark game, there's not a single main narrative. I'm letting the story emerge through play. This game is old school, the stakes are lower, and the world is smaller. But I still want things to be happening in it. I want the world to change and evolve. I want the players to hear rumors between adventures about nearby places, things that make them curious enough to risk life and limb to participate in those events. In my Khett adventure, I initially called my factions forces, as in the forces that are operating on the game world. After all, just because two NPCs might both be revolutionaries, it doesn't make them an organized faction that's working together. By the end of the campaign, I was calling them factions, even if they were a little bit simplistic. Each faction was represented by a single, influential, powerful NPC and the people who supported them. In that game, there were really only 4 types of factions: loyalists, revolutionaries, opportunists, and foreign powers. But in my old school game, the factions are not going to center around the resolution of a single narrative tension, because there is no single narrative tension. The thing that ties the game together is the player characters. Factions in my Shadowdark game could be doing anything, and some of them may not even interact with one another at all, although it's almost certainly more interesting if they do. In thinking about how I want to handle factions moving forward, I came up with a few stated goals. Goal number 1, I want the players in my game to be aware of the factions and their activities. At a minimum, a faction should be identifiable and their activities should be observable. If my faction is a super secret spy organization that my players never see or even hear about, then I shouldn't bother. As far as the players are concerned, that's not a faction, and it has absolutely no impact on their perception of the game. Goal number 2, I want my players to develop opinions, attachments, and even rivalries with the factions presented in the game. This means that the factions need to interact with things that the players care about and elicit an emotional response. They need to upset the player's apple cart or offer some crucial aid in a time of need. To be totally fair, this one could be really difficult to pull off. Let's cross my fingers and we'll see how we do. Players are never as engaged in an RPG campaign as the game master is. But hey, I can dream, right? Goal number 3, I want my factions to interact in ways that change the game world. When a faction accomplishes a goal, there must be a change in the world. And I'll extend this a bit further and say that there must be a change in the world that is apparent to the players. That'll help a little bit with goal number 1 as well. If 2 minor nobles restore an alliance that has been broken for 1,200 years, who cares? Now, I'm not being rude here. I actually want to know, who cares if this alliance has been restored? What will it mean for regional stability? Who stands to gain or lose now that the friendship of the old kingdoms has been rekindled? And who might be looking to hire a ragtag band of misfits to challenge this new union for fun and profit? And finally, goal number 4. I want my factions to require as little management as possible in order to accomplish goals 1 through 3. I also want managing my factions to be my problem as the game master. There should be absolutely no hassle whatsoever for the players. They aren't driving over to my house on game night because they want to help me execute some background simulation of the game world. They want to play their characters. As a quick recap, goal number 1, the party should know who the factions are. Goal number 2, the party should have opinions about the factions. Goal number 3, the factions' activities should change the game world. And goal number 4, this should be as easy as possible for me to run as the game master. In studying factions, I read a bunch of different takes on how factions and kingdoms could be run. Most of the rules I read were either too heavyweight or they focused on things I didn't really care about, like digging a deeper moat around your castle and how many laborers it would take to do that. Now, for the record, I think moats are cool, but it's just not what I'm interested in right now. Eventually, I had no choice but to ask the social media hive mind, and it didn't take long for me to get an answer. Now, the hive mind always has an answer, but often the loudest voices have the worst ideas. Not this time, however, because a very helpful human being called Cats Have No Lord provided me with 2 suggestions to go read up on: Mausritter and Cairn 2nd Edition. And these were great suggestions because both games are free in PDF, and I already owned Cairn 2nd Edition in print. In fact, at the time, Cairn was sitting on my nightstand, but up to that point, I'd only taken the time to read the player's guide. I downloaded and read Mausritter's faction rules that morning before work, and it was almost exactly what I was looking for. Mausritter's factions have goals and resources, and between sessions, the game master rolls a d6 to see if progress is made towards one of their given goals. The die roll is positively modified by the faction's relevant resources, and it's negatively modified by the relevant resources of any competing or rival factions. Player characters are allowed to interfere with or support a faction, which hinders or boosts their progress towards one of their goals. And upon completion of a goal, the faction gains a new resource, thus increasing its influence in the region. And that's it. It's pretty simple, it's low prep, and with a little bit of help from the in-game fiction, Mausritter's factions would support accomplishing my goals. To better support the game's narrative, I figured I'd steal Grim Portents from Dungeon World. For each goal a faction had, I'd add a Grim Portent, some foreshadowing or observable in-game change that would help the players understand when a faction was on the move. I'm pretty sure this is something you would naturally do in Mausritter, but I wanted to add it so it was a little more codified. I was pretty sure I had cracked it, and I was feeling good. And then I sat down and started to write this script. I was about 85% of the way done, and I realized I just couldn't quite see it. I mean, it all sounded good in theory, but when I sat down to create the factions and put them into practice, I felt a bit rudderless, like that song by the Lemonheads. Are there any youths of the 90s era who listened to alternative rock here? I see you. I just didn't see how it was going to work when I started to try to create the actual factions for my actual game. And that's when I remembered that I hadn't taken the time yet to read Cairn 2nd Edition. It was on my list, so I picked it up. Factions are almost the first thing in the book. You'll find them on page 8. Cairn expands on Mausritter's factions infrastructure by adding definition without overly complicating prep and game running processes. Cairn factions have advantages and agendas, which map really nicely to Mausritter's resources and goals, respectively. Advantages represent power, influence, and wealth, anything that helps aid a faction in achieving their aims. A faction's agenda includes 3 to 5 goals, just like those in Mausritter. When a faction accomplishes the goals associated with an agenda, the region should change in some significant and observable way. I'm on board so far. Cairn also adds a couple of elements that don't appear in Mausritter: agents and obstacles, and these add even more definition. Agents are faction leaders or officers that are charged with accomplishing one or more of the goals from the agenda. You can have as many agents as you need, 1 to n agents, and scale that concept up or down as your game requires. By establishing agents, you associate an individual, their face and their name, as the person responsible for a faction's actions. Obstacles are challenges that a faction faces in accomplishing their agenda, which can provide ready hooks for adventure. And Cairn also provides a series of D20 tables for inspiration or random faction generation. For my game, I'll probably use them primarily for inspiration, though I may roll a die or two just to see if something cool comes up. But as the game progresses and I need new factions, I might randomly roll some of them. When a faction is positioned to accomplish an item on their agenda, the Game Master rolls a d6 on a faction action table. That's fun to say. The result determines if a goal is achieved or not, and if any advantages are gained or lost, altering the faction's influence in the region. Now, some results include a mix of positive and negative outcomes, and that's kind of cool because it means even the Game Master could be surprised by what happens when a faction takes a really big swing. Rules as written, Cairn covers almost everything that I need to accomplish my faction goals. Just like before, I'll probably add the concept of grim portents from Dungeon World to help out in achieving goals 1 and 3. For each goal in my faction's agenda, I'll add a grim portent that manifests itself as a change in the world when the goal is achieved. I'll probably call them impacts or fallout because I'm a simple man and grim portent seems kind of like a $2 word. Bit rich for my blood. Now, Cairn's agents are going to help me out with goal number 2. As a game master, I'll make sure that the fallout of faction activities affects the players and the parts of the world that they care about. And then I'll use agents to establish an individual upon whom the players can focus their appreciation or enmity. Ultimately, this kit bash of mechanics gives faction creation and management just enough structure to accomplish the first 3 goals without giving up on goal number 4, keeping it simple. I made a faction worksheet for generating factions on Google Docs, and I'll include a link to it in the description in case you want to try this out. Is anybody still watching this? I see you've made it all the way to the end. Why don't you mark 3 XP down on your character sheet? Thank you so much for watching. Hit me up in the comments below. Let me know how you handle factions in your games. Do you even have factions that influence more than just a single dungeon, or are all of your factions intra-dungeonous? Is that a word? Take care, everybody. Be cool. Be nice. Goodbye.